All right, welcome back, and we're going to jump into understanding the tracker node. Just as I've spoken about before, a lot of friends of mine who have worked as supervisors in the VFX industry would tell you that they start out spending a good amount of time just doing stuff like clean planing, removing little elements, two-dimensional type stuff for like maybe 2 or 3 years. Before they even get into 3D or incorporating a dragon in their shot or a big explosion. So there's a lot of work involved or a lot of elements involved in using tracking. Like I mentioned before, 2D tracking, 3D tracking, and planar tracking. And we're going to cover all these. But I first want to just go over the basics of the tracker. So I went ahead and loaded up our Shot 2 Sony A6300 1080p 50mm. Obviously here's the footage, and I'm just kind of playing it through. I just set this to input and hit play. Again, you can just hit R for read and bring it in. So I'm going to go ahead and start kind of playing around with the shot. So I'm going to hit tab and type in tracker. This is the atypical tracker. You would commonly see this in After Effects or other programs. So I'm going to take the tracker and just stick it onto the read node, put my viewer to it. And again, I like to put my properties bin to 1, just so that I don't have to have a million things in here. And I'm going to go ahead and stabilize this shot. So if I go ahead and say add tracker, you'll see as I take a look in here, sometimes it's hard to see this, so I can go ahead and bring down my f-stops here just to see. You have a kind of a search index window and then your general imprint window. So it's going to look for this image, which in this case would be, like for instance, if I just move this, and you're going to move it by clicking the center and clicking and holding with the left mouse button. So let's say, for instance, if I go ahead and change the shape of this center square, I'm looking for this shape within this area of movement of the camera. Now, if the camera pans to the left or to the right or up and down really quick, I'm probably going to extend this out. But the danger of doing that is the possibility of it jumping to a pattern that's similar. For instance, this pattern is very similar to this pattern here. So that's kind of an important thing to kind of realize. You'll see with the tracker node enabled, there's a whole bunch of little buttons up here that we have access to. There's all types of stuff up here that we can go into. There's also another, what looks like another just general player up here, and this is the tracker player. So we can go ahead and work on that situation. So I want to find something to in the shot that doesn't get occluded by, for instance, these women that walk by or a car that passes by. So I'm going to go ahead and let's choose this right here. Now I chose this shape because it's very unique. Usually within tracking you want to have something that's like an L shape at the minimum, and there's contrast between kind of bright and dark values because it's going to look for this pattern and move on to the next frame. So this is a very unique pattern, and it's very isolated. If I were to actually come in and make my actual object that I'm searching for instance, like this, right? It might accidentally, while it's tracking, jump over to this, because it looks similar in shape. It's also going to slide around if I choose this as my search index, okay? Because this could be the same as this, see that? So it's important to have sort of an L shape or some sort of element, at the very minimum, something like this, that actually creates a unique shape that is not going to have it sliding up and down or back and forth. So again, this is the image it's going to look for in the forward frame or in the previous frame, because we track forward or backward. And it's going to look for it as we track within this window. Now, I don't want this one to be too big. This shot is relatively, it moves a little bit, but not too much. So this will actually increase computation time as well. I'm going to put my f-stop back. And I think that's good enough. I don't think it's going to jump around at all. To kind of make sure I have a unique piece here, I have this here, which obviously doesn't exist here or here. So with the tracker selected, you can see it has 3 options: translate, rotate, and scale. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and track this. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. And I'll go ahead and track forward. So you can see the minute you set a track, you have a little blue tick mark here, and that's a keyframe. So you can see it's in your dope sheet as well. Just be aware of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and track forward. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. You have a couple options to track forward. You can say track to next, which is the next frame. And there you can see what happened. We have a new keyframe here, and it just basically is moving with this image as much as possible. There's also this option here, which is just, track to end. And then there's the option which is track forward range. I like track forward range because you actually allow it to stop if you want it to stop. For instance, if I just hit play, it's going to keep tracking until I hit stop. Okay. You can see all these little blue tick marks here. They're inside the dope sheet. That's again our animation. And everything is looking good. But what if I wanted to stop without having to worry about it? What if I wanted to go to 100 and not have to go any further? Well, if I hit this little R here, it's going to say, where do you want to track from? Well, I'm going to track from 56. I'm going forward, obviously. And to the end, I'm going to go to 100. Okay. And I'm going to use steps one at a time. Now, I could track every 5 frames, but that's not going to be a very steady track or something. I want every single frame to be calculated. So I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see it takes off. And there you go. If at any one time you need to adjust these keys because they're not perfect, and one way of knowing that is by clicking this little stopwatch here, which shows you the error rate. Anything green is good and anything red is bad news. Okay. So if I kind of scrub back, and notice I'm not hitting play up here, okay, because that would be retracking. I'm literally clicking and holding my left mouse button and dragging this back and forth until I get to the area that's like red. So like right there, you can see. Now, as you can see, as I scrub, my eye will be up here on this little window. And I can use my arrow keys as well and see how it looks. And despite this saying red, I think it's still a pretty solid track. Now, there's a beautiful thing inside of this program where you can kind of paint over the same area, the same way you kind of paint a house and you overlap, We're going to go ahead and track forward and see if a secondary kind of run through will actually help the track. So I'm going to go ahead and just click forward, and you'll start to see, oops, not the direction we want to go to. We want to go backwards. And you'll see it's going to start reevaluating once again, and you'll start to see some of these points might change colors. This is still red, but some will get yellow and orange. Orange is kind of danger zone. And so forth. And you can see right there we got a red dot, so that might be a little bit tricky. I can actually manually move that one if I want to. So for instance, if I find that frame with that little red dot there, and again I'm going to compare, my eye is not here, my eye is right over here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And I know that's the problem child one. So if I feel I want to move it, I can click in this little window here and like drag up and down. And that's going to be a hand-keyed version, so hence it turns green, meaning, okay, you made the decision on that one, so we know that it's solid. So everything here is really nice and green. As you can see, I want to cover everything here with blue tick marks, so I'm going to keep tracking to the end here. And then I'll just click and drag to the end here. I don't have to retrack over any of this, but I'm going to come close to the end, last frame that's been tracked. And then I'm going to go ahead and just say track to end. So as you can see, it's going through its tracking. We have a pretty very, very quiet shot. If you find you're losing the track or if it jumps off the track, then you'll have to come in and delete tracks if you need to. Okay, so there you go. So for instance, if there was any circumstance where you didn't want to have tracking or you didn't want to have these tracking points, you can see in the dope sheet, here's all the keys that you can physically select and delete if you wish. But for instance, if I wanted to just say stop at maybe 218 and I want to delete all the keys forward, you can use this little hotkey here, which is clear forward. And that's going to basically cut all the frames forward. I'll hit undo so you can see it. And then you can do the same opposite in this direction by saying clear backward. Sometimes you get bad tracks and you need to retrack over. Like for instance, if I come here, maybe I want to increase the size so that I don't get any drifting. Now we have a pretty solid track, but there are times where the track's going to fly all over the place, and an actual increase of the size of this search index gives you a more defined image. It's going to take longer to go, but I'm going to retrack over that data, and you can see now it's green. It's giving me a nicer, refined version of this. The dangers of using tracks that are smaller And I'll just show you is I'll just drag this down really ridiculously small. And we'll see what happens now. So I'll go ahead and track backwards. And see how it is holding on, but it's barely holding on. I'm gonna hit cancel and I'm gonna hit undo. And we're kind of back where it is. I'm basically gonna try to break this track, you know, by just having something, the search index so stupidly small here. Although Nuke is pretty good at this. I'm going to go ahead and track forwards. Let's see if it breaks. There we go. It's still holding on, but you see how it's shaking a little bit there? It's kind of going back and forth, back and forth. Let me hit undo here. And I'm going to hit undo just because it just wasn't good enough. But there are times when things will get goofy when you track in here. And I'll show you that in a little bit. So here we have a track. It's looking good. There are also a couple other options here. We can say center viewer, and you also have update viewer. And if you go ahead and hit play, it's going to basically what's called stabilize the shot. And that's going to keep the shot at the center. You can see the edge of the frame is kind of getting chopped off back and forth. And one thing to keep in mind about Nuke is you have to wait until it completely caches. Now, I'm not sure why my cache isn't working. I should see green bars come down here. You can see I am getting somewhat of a cache. But this will allow me to see it. You never judge the cache, the old saying, because it may look jumpy, but until you actually play back the footage, you'll actually see it being relatively fast. This is how you can judge if something's off and so forth. So I'm going to turn those off, and now you can see we're just back to the regular footage itself. Okay, so we've got the tracking in here, and there's a couple things we can do with this in regards to stabilization. Exporting has a whole bunch of options here. So export, I can choose all types of things, a corner pin and a transform. Okay, so these are basically one thing and a second thing. There are different ways of doing this. Like, for instance, there's a transform stabilize, there's a transform match move, there's a stabilize baked, and there's a match move baked. So let's go ahead and take the transform stabilize, and I'll go ahead and just click that, and we're going to create a node for that. And you can see this transform stabilized has this little link here. You can go ahead and type in Command E if you want to get rid of that obnoxious line, but that line basically means it's linked. Okay, if I were to come back to my tracker node, and instead of saying transform stabilize, but transform stabilize baked, the information in here is baked. So the keys are dark blue, meaning they're just baked into the information here. You can see the curve editor. Whereas these guys are light blue, meaning they're linked to the tracker. So this is cool because if we need to propagate the data from the tracker, like we need to update it, it'll propagate, the information will feed down the updates into this one. So I commonly use this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you what either one of those will do, and I'll just go ahead and plug it in here, and I'll put my viewer to it. And now you can see what's going on. You can see that the image is just like how we were doing with the hold center viewer here. It's basically taking that point and stabilizing it. Now we still have data here in the bounding box. You can see it's just hidden away. It's kind of off to the frame, but these little dots mean there's still data there. So to kind of make this shot look nice, say it's a car commercial or something, I'll add a transform node. And a transform node, again, is right here. And if I want to, I can go ahead and hold down Control and left mouse click and change the pivot of this. And that's basically the center. You can see the center is changing. And I'll put that in the center, and then I'm going to go ahead and just move this over. I'll put my viewer to the transform node. And you can see as I move this around, it's still stabilizing, but now it has a transform and I've moved it around. See that? So I don't want to see these edges. I put this sort of like in the middle here, right? You can still see we're getting cutoffs on the edge here of our full frame. So I'm going to take my scale and just dial that up just ever so slightly. And then move this roughly to the center. And let's see if we can do this. And I can hit the letter Q to hide any overlays. If I hover over this and I hit the letter Q, I can hide the overviews. And I want to make sure that, see, it's still getting cut off. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this up even more. So I can usually just grab a left click and drag and grab that and use my middle mouse scroll wheel. get some subtleties, and then I'll go ahead and just drag this down. So it looks like it's staying within the bounds. I don't have to zoom in anymore. So let's go ahead and just see how this looks. See that? Nice car commercial. The image has been stabilized. There might be some motion blur artifacts because the camera's moving around, but it's no longer super duper shaky, which is really cool. So that's stabilization. That's commonly done if there's a shot that's maybe a little bit shaky, but it allows you to kind of just stabilize your shot and make it look good. I can also animate this transform and make this commercial a little bit spiffier. For instance, at frame 100, like the car is about to come into the shot, I can actually transform this. I'll go ahead and hit Q with my overlays while my cursor is over my viewer. And I'm going to go ahead and just take this and start on this side of the frame. And I'm going to go ahead with the translate X and Y, little squiggly line here, right click and say set key. So at frame 100, the camera is here. And then let's say frame 150, we're going to move it over. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to move in the translation X. So I'm going to go ahead and click here. And let's go ahead and just shift this over so that we get a nice camera pan movement here. So as the car kind of comes to a stop. There we go. So we have two keys. And you can physically see it moving, right? If I hit Q to get rid of the overlays, we have this kind of cool, fancy car commercial where, or maybe just a scene in a movie where we're establishing a car pulling up with our main actors. Now the interpolation is important between this keyframe and this keyframe. If I go to my curve editor and hit F to frame, you can see we have an X and a Y input, right? Y, which is no information or no animation on the Y, and then X. This is the movement left and right. The interpolation is linear right now, so it has a very blasé mechanical, it just like a ping pong. It's like boom, boom, starts moving and then hits a hard stop, right? You can go ahead and you can see that a little bit better here if I go ahead and take this key, and I think I'll just move it over really quick so we can see it dramatically happen. It's gonna be like a ping pong. Like, see that? It's real like, it looks very mechanical. Okay, that's a linear key. So what I can do is I can grab these keys, right click on them, interpolation, and I can choose horizontal. And now we have an ease in and an ease out. Go ahead and hit play. If you're familiar with animation, it kind of works that way. Now the animation's happening so quick, I'm going to kind of spread these keys out a little bit. Hit play. And so now we have a nice ease in and nice ease out. Looking really nice. You also can come in here and play with these tangents. So you can see you can move these up and down. And there's all types of things you can do in here. You can also come in here and you can also break the tangent. And, oops. Now you can kind of like break it and change it if you like, which is really cool. Or you can go ahead and grab these, right click, and say something like, oh, you can smooth it, you can do, again, linear again. What's really cool is you can also use these little boxes here, this kind of box thing here, to kind of scale your image or move them together. It's really cool. If you grab a bunch of keys, you can actually use your little move around this little plus sign here, and you can actually move the keys, lock it to a up and down transform, or left to right transform. Or if you go to the center, you can move it all around, which is kind of cool. The dope sheet is also here, which you can move the keys physically yourself by clicking them and grabbing your left mouse button. You can see that's updating in our dope sheet, or in our curve editor. So there you go. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this transform. And I want to show you what also is here, and that's called a match move. If I take this tracker, I can say export and choose what's called a match move. Now we just did a stabilize. The match move is sort of like the opposite of that. It's recording the actual camera movement. So if I go ahead and click on match move and say create, I get another node that has the connection through. And this time, this is kind of cool. I can apply anything to this image. For instance, if I come over here, I'm going to go ahead and make a color wheel. There it is. And I'm going to make sure the root, the format, is 1920 by 1080. So I'll just go 19 by 1080. Okay. And that's because this image here is 1920 by 1080. Okay. I'm going to add a transform node on this. And then I'm going to add this through the transform match move. And what that's going to do, if I go ahead and put my viewer to it, I'll just go ahead and transform this down. I'll just scale this down here. Is it's actually replicating the animation in the original shot. So if you kind of put 2 and 2 together here, I can hit M for merge, again B for background, and A for a top. And what I get is this. And you can see as I play it, it's kind of sticking to a point. Now, it's important to know that there is parallax going on here. As the camera's panning around, objects closer to the camera are moving faster. Objects way in the background are moving not as fast. So this can only be locked down to, say, in the depth distance of what we tracked, which is right here. So for instance, if I take this transform node, I'll go ahead and scale it down, I'll move it up. It's going to look like it's actually sticking on right where we tracked in 3D space, which is way over here. You can see it's a little bit drift there, but it's pretty much staying in continuity with the movement of the actual, light there. Now, if we were to move this down here, say next to this white patch here, right? And let's go ahead and play. You'd see there's a little bit of drift. Just a little bit. This is a very long lens, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. But you can see there is a drift going on. Okay, that's because tracking. If you're going to put something in with tracking, it has to be where the points are. So keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this transform and this color wheel. I want to show you something that's kind of cool. I talked about before how the match move is actually the opposite of the stabilize, which is interesting. So I can take this match move, plug it into this after the stabilize. So then this, we've stabilized the shot, right? Everything is nice and steady, right? Now I'm going to match move it, put the match move back on, and lo and behold, we have the same motion as what we had before. Now, why would anybody do this sort of thing? Why would you do this? Well, in certain circumstances, you can go ahead and put a node between the stabilize and the match moves. Say, for instance, let's use a roto paint node. And we haven't kind of talked about this yet, but I'll click the roto paint node and put it in there. And with the roto paint node, you can see we have a whole bunch of things to do here. And I haven't talked too much about this, but you can go ahead and click here and hit the brush. And I can go ahead and with my shift key, I can click left mouse button, hold, and shift and drag left and right and create, a shape. I'm going to set my option here to color all frames. The current color is this white. I'm going to go ahead and click on it and give it maybe a green color or something. Or let's give it purple. And I'm going to go ahead and just paint here. Okay, maybe I wanted to paint something, I don't know. There's a lot of things you can do in here. There's a clone. There's stuff like blur. And again, I will put this to all for all frames so that it shows up in all frames. You can see I can blur this area up. And what this does now, if I put it through the match move, is it's now stuck on there. So I painted it when everything was static and still, right? But at the match move, you can see now it's on there, which is kind of cool. It's a nice way of working. Now, be aware though, we have such things as lens distortion, we have such things as a parallax difference between foreground and background, so this technique is very limited. If we were to paint near the edges of the frame, it would drift. If we were to put this in the foreground area for something that was tracked in the far background, it would drift. We have to talk about this later in regards to planar tracking and 3D tracking and removing lens distortion to kind of really get a solid track and when we start doing such things as cleanup. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. Let's get rid of all these for now. I just want to get rid of all these guys. Okay, so we're back to the tracker, right? Now, what's also really cool about this tracker is you can actually turn it into a node without having an extra node. So you noticed how we had to bake something out, right? We're like, okay, we got to bake it out. That's great and all. You can also come over here under the transform node and turn this into an actual tracker. So I can go ahead and say stabilize, right? And look at my viewer through the tracker, and now it becomes a stabilized node. If I turn it into a match move node, now we're going to get double the amount of animation that we got. We're actually increasing the camera movement by twice as much. Okay, that's like called a double transform, so to speak. And there's all types of things in here like remove jitter and add jitter. We could talk about that later. But I'm going to go ahead and set this to none. And here you go. We'll also be talking about reference frame later and how you can choose a reference frame, and that's the frame that you want to use as your beginning. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in here for removing jitter and so forth. So you can see there's other options here for translate, rotate, and scale as well. Okay. So in the next lesson, we're going to start to get into that, but I wanted to just cover the basics of understanding what the tracker can do and how we can use it for all types of processes, including putting in lens flares and all types of interesting stuff.